Oops. All video game music. Well, here we are. That's Tecmo Super Bowl. Anybody watching football? The fall is here. Although it feels like summer still around these parts of the country. Well, we got some boss music tonight. And something that's not going to happen tonight, I'm not going to fall asleep. Do you believe me? Alright. Well, let's just keep things going. I think we're off to a good start. I told you what that song was, so that's pretty good, right? Well, let's listen to Mega Man X3 for Super Nintendo. Not a boss song. Although there's one at the end of this stage. It's the opening stage. Here we go on Oops All Video Game Music. Right now, it's coming up. You're going to hear it in just a second. Love you a lot. Here we go. Well, you can tell that was Konami Arcade, can't you? I certainly can. Sounds like it's got a lot in common with the Ninja Turtles arcade soundtracks. Anyway, that was Lethal Enforcers boss music. And before that, we had, that was a game called Moon Crystal. That was a boss song from that. And before that, Dungeon Explorer. That was a boss song from that. And we're going. We're going like Bob. Except in this particular instance, we're not hosting or co-hosting Entertainment Tonight. Anyway, let's hear another boss song. Let's hear a song from, how about a Capcom arcade? Nemo.
Hi, what's your name? My name is Robin Duke.
And what school do you go to, Robin?
I go to Richmond Collegiate.
Boss School. What grade are you in?
I'm in grade 11.
Anybody you want to say hi to out there?
No, not really, thanks.
Funky Threads, Robin. Hi, what's your name?
Rick Keaton.
And what school do you go to, Rick?
Richmond Collegiate.
And what grade are you in?
9.
Boss grade. Anybody you want to say hi to out there?
No.
Boss outfit, Rick, really. Hi, what's your name?
Ray Klinger.
And what school do you go to, Ray?
Richmond Collegiate. Central Tech.
Boss School. What grade are you in?
12.
Anybody you want to say hi to out there?
No.
Well, we had Lightning Fighters, Stage 1 boss. And then we had Gundhara, Big Boss Main. Oh, I'm sorry, someone's tapping me on the shoulder. Hang on. And then, Justard Mustard. Legend of Zelda. The Spirit Tracks. Oh, and it does, believe you me, you. It tracks like a motherfucker. Speaking of motherfuckers, let's hear from Sunsoft. They're always pretty good at boss music. Maybe not always, but in the late 80s, there was a brief late 80s, early 90s time period when Sunsoft was a pretty good company and had killer music. Even if the game itself wasn't killer. Here's Fester's Quest, Boss Battle.
All right, Don, what's going on? Yeah, what? What? That coffee's not strong enough. Don, hey! These phones aren't working. Rachel! These phones aren't working. Get someone. Do something. Just... Ow. Get back to work! That's better. Next time I'll fry up and eat you. Does my heart look like it's in straight?
Looks fine to me.
I just had a weird experience.
Maybe your blood sugar's low.
Probably. Mental note. Be a better person. Shoo. Go. Okay, Don, what's going on? What do you mean this is John? John, put on Ron. Put on Don. Come on. Get him on.
Some Arkanoid, DS, background music, D, and I think you know what that D stands for. Dipshit. Nah, I like to think it's whatever you want it to stand for, you know? But right now, that's how I feel. It stands for an Arkanoid dipshit. And that's something you never want to be. An Arkanoid dipshit. After that, we had a Nintendo game called Dino Wars. Or as a guy that I used to be friends with liked to call it, Dino Wars. That was the boss song from that. And, you know, that was I think it was a Bandai game. Maybe I should look that up. It's Dino Wars with a Z, by the way, folks. It is, yes, it's Bandai. It's an interesting game. Around the same time, kind of, as Monster Party, which was also Bandai. They had some weird fucking games, and I enjoyed them. They had their flaws, but still very fun and weird, you know, and the music was pretty good, although short and repetitive often, but I guess that's par for the course, you know what I mean? Anyway, we had that, and then we had Final Star Force Boss #1. Well, I hope you're enjoying this boss music. I hope you haven't heard it as many times as I have, but I'm still enjoying it. The real fun for me is to listen back to these whilst not doing the show. Because when I'm doing it, I have to keep playing shit, try to stay on top of it and try not to fall asleep, you know. But, yeah, I enjoy it. That's why I keep doing it. And I don't have to give this speech on every episode. It's just great to be here with you. And I love you a lot. Thanks for listening. If you have a request, send it our way. We do play requests on this show. I'll give a shout out to you. And if you want me to do a long distance goddamn death dedication, I'll do that too. As Mr. Greasem used to do. Well, we got a lot more to play tonight. And some of it is Mega Man. So let's play some of that. Here's a boss song I always loved. And it's a bonus situation because it's the Game Boy version of it, and it's in stereo where available, which you have no excuse for stereo not to be available, whatever device you're using. When I was a kid, I was teased by many opening themes and intros to TV shows that would say, in stereo where available. And I just always, you know, wished I was in that available spot. Eventually, my parents got a new TV, and that was a game changer. It was a Zenith. But anyway, I was way into stereo sound as a kid at a certain point, because I didn't think much of it until like I said, you started seeing that logo thing that would come on the beginning of shows, and it made it seem pretty important. And it was, really, when Super Nintendo came out, a lot of those games would utilize the stereo sound to enhance the gaming experience. 2 channels of audio, not just one. It's crazy to think about now because games are so complicated. It's an immersive experience. A little bit too much for me. Or maybe I just haven't given it a shot. But I've always just been a fan of the music from games. And let's hear some more of that. hopefully I wasn't setting up a specific song and forgot about it with all my blabbing. I'm going to proceed as though that has not happened. Do you like McDonald's? Well, it's not my favorite place, but I do tend to mention it on this show quite a bit. And here's a song from the video game McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure Final Boss. Now, if you think this is going to sound like Ronald McDonald fucking around, it kind of does, but maybe it's not what you're expecting. Let's give a listen. That was a banger, maybe even a mash. Definitely not bangers and mash at the same time. It was more of a Scottish situation, a bit of a MacDonald. So I think I was setting up for Mega Man 3 for Game Boy, and then I didn't play it. Does that sound right, folks? I think that's what was going on. Let's hear that now. Boss music. Boss music, bro. Mega Man 3, Game Boy, and stereo were available. And if I already played that, I'll just edit this out.
Yamaha portable electronic keyboards for everyone who never ever thought they could carry a tune.
was a game called Battle Bakrade. Sorry, I was very quiet there. Battle Bakrade. Dan Aykroyd with a hemorrhoid, playing Arkanoid and all that shit. We had our Arkanoid for the night. It sounded kind of like, if not Shinji Hoso, definitely sounded like a Capcom musician from the late 90s, early 2000s. Anyway, that was a song called Terrible Object Aerial Boss. And before that, we had Nebulous Ray, Final Enemy. And before that, an SNK joint, Prehistoric Isle. Definitely sounded SNK. I know what that sounds like. If you don't, then that's okay. You're still a decent human being, probably. I hope. If you're listening to this, odds are you are. But every time I hear odds are, I can't help but think, he won't see tomorrow. Let's hear some more music. How about we go back to Konami? One of my favorite NES boss songs. Great soundtrack from some composers who, my assumption is that they went on to be the Natsume composers with parentheses around that S. I have a bubble in my throat and there's only one person that can pop it, honey. Is the bubble gone? Okay. Bertha is pretty good at popping bubbles. Mama made it. Mama, you're in trouble, you son of a bitch. You cocksucker. Bertha, this is a family show, although we're very careful to say it's not for kids, because you better do that, right? Never know when a fella is gonna pull some shit, you know? Well, let's keep things going. Did I say something about Capcom? If so, I'm not sure if this is where I was going, but here's a Capcom arcade, a Q sound situation. And it's got two of Bertha's favorite things on it. Okay. That's a reference that you might not get if you don't listen to certain shows. Here's a game called Cadillacs and Dinosaurs.
Boy, it's a good-looking group. Hi there. What's your name? A little shy, I guess. And people get shy in Mel's Rock Pile. It's a big show. Hi there. What's your name?
Joe Blow.
Oh, come on. That's not your real name.
That's B-L-O-U-G-H, Mel.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe. What school do you go to?
Greenback High.
Greenback. That's funny. I've never heard of Greenback before.
It's a private school.
A private school. Well, nice to have you with us, Joe.
Thanks, Mel.
Moi, Mel, and you are?
Frank Blow.
Frank Blow. Isn't that something? You're not,
No, just a coincidence.
Well, isn't that something? What school do you go to, Frank?
Greenback.
You go to Greenback, too. Isn't that something? Greenback, I've never heard of it, and here we have two gentlemen that go to Greenback with the same last name. What a coincidence. Nice to have you with us. Hi, Mel here, and you are?
Jim Blow.
Jim Blow. You're not related.
No.
Do you go to,
Yeah.
Greenback?
Yeah.
You must be Lou Blow.
That's right, sir.
You go to
Yes, I go to Greenback.
Greenback. No relation, I suppose.
No, I've never met them before. Never.
Gee, I don't know. Why do I get the impression you fellas are putting me on here?
No. You're too sensitive, really.
Well, okay. Well, nice to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, as you can see, we have a lot of fun here in the Rock Pile this week. People laughing and everything. Okay, we're going to slow things down right now in the Rock Pile.
Well, we heard some Konami. Madara. That was a VRC 6, or was it 7 chip Konami game in Japan. Not what we just heard, but earlier. And then after that we heard some more Konami, although not so much Konami, but them licensing out a company to make a game. But kudos to that company for using music from Castlevania 3. That was like the final boss song, but on the Game Boy Advance, Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Love that a lot. And what we just heard, Mustard. Has a game called Mechanized Attack. That was the last boss. Very repetitive, as you could tell. Did not last long. But I loved it a lot, and I had to play it on the show. Sometimes there's an exception to the rule. Sometimes everybody does not, in fact, legally have an obligation by law to play, in fact, the fool. But I understand it probably seems that way because of how I act, you know? I'm just a guy who likes video game music. And speaking of that, let's hear some more of it. It's more Konami. And it's a boss song. It's by You Billy. Well, thanks, Chris. Heels back. That was Terminator. I mean, Turrican 2. That was a song called Hypercycle Drive. Before that, we had Surprise Attack. Did it surprise you? Before that, Rod Land, Theme of Boss 2. And before that, I guess it was Mega Man X3 or Rockman X3 boss song. Well, I still got a few more things to play tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully I've not accidentally repeated anything. But if so, like I said, I'll just go ahead and edit that out. I love editing. What I really love is doing this show. And let's keep it going. Here's a song from The Next Space. Area 5. You guessed it. Boss. was a fun joint. That was from Yu Yu Hakusho, aka Sunset Fighters. And the track was, well, needless to say, is a track of extraordinary magnitude. Smiling Bomb. Instruction version. Well, that makes it okay, right? Before that, we had some boss music. And it was from a game called Monster Party for Nintendo. The aforementioned Bandai. I always enjoyed that song, and I thought I could play it tonight at a certain spot, you know. Well, thanks for listening. I mentioned Ninja Gaiden 2. Did I mention the other songs? Monster Party. Yeah. Whatever the other one was. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll be back Friday with an all-new set of songs, thank God. And until next time, don't you dare forget, even for a half second, don't forget to power up.